പോളണ്ടിൽ എന്ത് സംഭവിച്ചു? പോളണ്ടിനെ പറ്റി നീ ഒരു അക്ഷരം മിണ്ടരുത്.
So we've been chatting a lot about COVID between the two of us and the effects it's having, and it occurred to us after recording the first episode that maybe it would be an interesting idea to look at the COVID releases from Malayalam cinema and maybe a little bit about what COVID means for movies.
We were discussing how Malayalam cinema, because it's smaller, is maybe a little more primed to adapt faster to not having movie theaters open. It's a little more nimble. It makes movies way faster than most of other industries. So we picked out a few OTT releases, over-the-top releases, which were put out through the streaming services. Primarily Amazon Prime, but also Netflix this year. Amazon Prime is definitely the top streaming service for Malayalam
and it was funny because I was mentioning to someone yesterday, even because there is a little tension around the whole Amazon as an industry, and my comment was, if I want to see Malayalam films, a lot of them go to Amazon Prime, and there really isn't a great there are other streaming services out there, and some of the films do go to other services like Netflix or Hotstar, but Amazon Prime seems to be the service that is picking up a lot of those films.
And the 4 films that we have picked out today, I did notice a difference in terms of something as simple as subtitling between Netflix and Amazon Prime, and I think that's something we can definitely talk about as we get to those films.
Yeah. And like briefly, I do know that, I don't know how it works for Netflix, but I do know that Amazon, the producers will hire a good subtitlist to title films, and Amazon will strip those subtitles out and get someone to do their own, and that often ends up very problematic in terms of subtitles. So we can maybe think about that, as we go on. So the first film we were going to talk about is on Amazon Prime, Sufiyum, Sujatayum.
That's right.
Sufia and Sujata.
Yeah, so the Sufi and Sujata are obviously the two. It's even the title kind of suggests that this is a mythical romance in some ways. Sujata is our lead character. She is mute but not deaf, as everyone emphasizes in the film itself. She is a Hindu girl somewhere in northern Kerala, I think probably Kasaragod. There's Kannada being spoken, everybody's wearing winter hats, so I'm assuming it's in northern Kerala. And she is a Kathak dancer. She's very artistic, she's interested in music, and she's very friendly with the local ustad of clarinet. And is that right, clarinet?
I'm blanking.
So I'm gonna say clarinet, and then I'll Google it. So at the ustad's house, she meets a whirling dervish. He's a Sufi, and he and Sujata form a connection because of their love for dance, and they fall in love, but obviously he is Muslim and she is Hindu, and her family obviously objects, and they arrange a marriage for her to a man who's working in Dubai, who used to be a graduate student in the college that she did her bachelor's in, and he has a PhD in mathematics, and there's a lot of contrast in the movie between the mathematics scholar and the spiritual man. They eventually marry, Sujata and the PhD, and they go to Dubai, but 10 years later, Sujata and her husband have to come back to her village, to attend a funeral. And so that's the small summary of the film.
Now, I know there was a lot of not terribly positive chatter about this film online. So I'm wondering how you perceived it all.
I thought this film was trying to be Nininde Moideen. There was a lot of shots, especially rain shots, and the locale that made me think that they were kind of drawing inspiration from that movie.
That's interesting that you say that, because that was the thought that came to mind for me as well.
Yeah. And there's, the fact that they were trying to compare them to, to like mythical lovers, which obviously Moideen and Kanjanamala are. Even as real people who are living, there is something very legendary about their love. We can talk, we can see, centuries down the line, even if this film, the film disappears, we can imagine, people talking about them like Hiranja or something like that. It didn't feel as deep. I mean, in the Ninda Moideen, I cried and cried and cried. This film, it didn't resonate with me in that way.
And for me as well, because I never really felt the connection between the two of them. I felt I was being told there's a connection between the two of them. And it made me think a little bit of Sukumodebi, where that moment at the beginning where she is absolutely drawn to Nandan singing. And you can sort of feel why there's this instant connection between the two of them that later gets a little bit established. And I kind of felt, okay, I could understand why there are moments why she might be drawn to this or that about Sufi, but I never really felt there was I never could grasp why this was so intense and why it was a relationship she'd never got over, because I never felt there was a relationship truly established.
And I think that part of it is in the story. They just they really did like a Deus Ex Machina, where they were like, he's a man of God, and that's why she loves him. And that's not. I mean, that's not a reason enough. You have to have something to go on. And what did you think of the choice to make her mute?
I didn't understand it. I kept asking myself, but why is she mute? She's hearing, but she can't speak. And is there a reason she can't speak? And I don't think they ever really gave us a purposeful reason behind that.
I had this theory that it was because Aditi Rao Haidari did not want somebody else to dub for her. And so they just were like, fine, you don't speak Malayalam and you don't want somebody to dub for you, you're just mute.
Because the thought crossed my mind, well, at least it was easy. They didn't have to hire someone to dub for her. So I think you may be on the right track here. And that's actually kind of disappointing, because if you're going to make this a character trait, make it something that contributes to the story in some way. And I never felt that it did.
See, I'm okay if it just is what it is, that she's mute and she's just going about her life. But there's clearly something to be said about the fact that they're trying to play with the fact that she's mute. So when her husband yells at her about how she's still hung up on this guy, she can't say anything back. So she just like kind of has tantrums and like steals things But it didn't tie together. They were trying to make something of the fact that she was mute, and somehow it related to the story. It wasn't just like, oh, this is a person with a disability and she's still going through life, because that would have been a different story entirely.
Yeah. No, and I don't need that to be part of this story. Yeah. But I think it's sort of just in the same way that Sufi we are shown this sort of mystical whirling dervish, I don't understand the purpose of that either in this story. That got me thinking a little bit, and maybe this is a superficial connection I'm making, but it got me thinking about Ustad Hotel, where Karim Ika sees the dervishes on the beach. And that, for me, was more of a connection. It made me understand his character more. and what his life was about and what his motivations were rooted in. And if you're going to insert a character who may symbolize an ability to perform miracles or some other aspect of that part of Muslim faith, I'd like to have him more than just this sort of mysterious figure who turns up, and I don't think I felt the emotional impact of this story that they wanted me to feel.
Yes.
Now, another of the complaints I heard was about bringing Jayasuriya on board and then squandering him in this way. And I have some thoughts about that, but I'm curious how you would respond to that.
I don't know why. So the way his role was written, it was like this is a producer role. The way Dokar appears in Maniyarayile Ashokan. So okay, so
well, and we'll see another example of that in another film as we go on. For me, I don't have any quibbles with his role. I really don't. I think if you're going to... The role was a small role about this husband and his frustration with his wife and his needing her to move on. I think the advantage of having an actor like Jayasuriya come in and do this is he's going to be reliable in that. He's going to be able to nail what that is. And I thought that he did a good job. It wasn't the main character. It wasn't, the two mythical lovers. I personally don't see the point of complaining about him in a role like that. If he's willing to come on board and do that to for a film that he obviously must have believed in, because otherwise why would he do it? Or, to do it as a favor for friends, that's also a possibility. I have no problems with that either.
This is a Friday Filmhouse production, and they gave Jayasuriya a very good the odd movies. So I can definitely see Jayasuriya just doing this because this is a good thing to do for your friend.
Yeah, you gave me some good moments in my career. Mm-hmm. I will give back, and I have no problems with that. And I don't think there was anything about his performance that you could quibble with under those circumstances. I mean, certainly he's a good enough actor to carry a film on his own. And I would never argue against that. But I also don't see why people have a problem with an actor taking on a little role for whatever purpose to help out a film.
So my sort of quibble, I would say, is that Jayasuriya felt like he was acting in a different movie than everybody else. The only exception being the mother of Sujata, played by Kalaranjini. Like, there's something, like, those moments with Jayasuriya and the parents felt like were the most captivating moments of the film for me, because I wanted to see more of this bad marriage, and I wanted to see more of this, the parents who are old now, but 10 years ago, when they made the choice to pressure their daughter into marrying somebody she wasn't ready to marry, they were middle-aged, and they're kind of reaping the repercussions of the decision they made to pressure her into a marriage. And you kind of feel like, yeah, this is what happens if you make bad choices in your younger years over a person you had control over, and now you're kind of saying that you're old people and you're suffering. And that, their helplessness was really, really powerful for me. That I liked that part of the movie.
Yeah, but I would agree with you that they seem to be telling two different styles of stories and didn't have a really good grasp on how they fit together. Which can be... I wasn't disappointed by the film. I mean, the cinematography is gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
And I know that I can be swayed when things are pretty.
The music is also very pretty.
Yes. I'm thinking the music is Gopi Sundar. No, the music is not Gopi. The music is M. Jayachandran.
Yeah, it's a great soundtrack, and I kept listening. I mean, I have been listening to Vadikala even before this, watching this movie, but it's an earworm, and it's very beautiful.
And I liked the idea of setting the story as somewhat of a folk tale or mythic romance. I liked the idea of a lot of things in this movie. I just wish they had kind of held together a little better. And I do think I liked it more than I might otherwise because it was beautiful to look at, because it was beautiful to listen to. There's that moment with the prayer beads, which I thought was really lovely, where Sufi says they were his mother's prayer beads, and every bead represents a prayer from his mother, and he wants to die with his mother's prayers. I thought that was a really interesting thing, and they did follow that through to the end of the film. They did seem to have an idea of things they wanted to do and a direction to go in, even if in the end it really didn't hang together as a whole.
Yeah, there were points like that, like him saying that she will speak when the henna tree blooms. Things like that didn't really like pan out. And going back to the idea of this being a fairy tale of sorts, honestly, I was struggling really hard to place this movie because I think that's something Malayalam movies really offer strongly is a sense of rootedness in a certain place. And I was trying to place this movie in a time because there's no cell phones, I guess. There is a cell phone. So at some point, but Sujata doesn't have one. And I was trying to decide why the men were wearing like the pajama kurtas and like the hats, the beanies, like it was Afghanistan, but like this is clearly Kerala. I'm like, where is it cold enough to be wearing these clothes? And like there was a lot of Hindi being spoken or Urdu, and sort of servant driver guy's wife is Kannadiga, so she speaks in Kannada. Yeah, it was really hard to place, and I think that kind of, when it takes me a little bit of time to place where something is happening, it doesn't allow me to jump into the movie as fast. I think this is something, a unique problem that I have with some of the new generation movies. Like, Amin had the same Nowhere Land. I mean, they did say that it's kind of mid-Travancore, that area. So you kind of knew what place it was, but you couldn't tell what time it was happening in. Kunyiramayanan is the same thing. It's like this like mystical land where they can't get this. I mean, that was easier to get into because it was a comedy and they were like trying to tell a parable. So that was a little hard for me.
That's an interesting thought, though, because on the one hand, you can see that if you're trying to create a timeless tale, you might not want to root it in time. But I think what you're showing is that you still have to give it some kind of roots in order for the story to connect fully with an audience.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not like they didn't label the time. It was clearly 2010 to 2020 because when we go 10 years later and they're living in Dubai, suddenly there's a very strong sense of place. This is Dubai. There's, they're in a flat in Dubai. It doesn't have this like gauziness that the way they filmed it doesn't have the gauziness that the Kerala scenes did. And there's a lot, I mean, I always have to note this. There's a lot of casteism in the movie, the way the mom treats Kumaran, like trying to hold the lease on their land over him to make him do unpaid labor, and the grandmother having to remind her daughter-in-law that, it's not the olden days. You can't just make him do things for free. You have to pay him for his work. The parents are, like, there's a lot of warmth between them and Sujata, but they're clearly not the best people. And it's very clear in the movie that you're not supposed to necessarily be rooting for the parents, even though there are beats in the movie where they get the typical mom and dad are gods treatment.
Well, I mean, in theory, we're supposed to be rooting for the two lovers. I never really connected with that story for a lot of the things we've already talked about, unfortunately. And yet I wasn't offended by the movie. I didn't feel it was a waste of my couple of hours, even if there were things about it that disappointed me. So maybe if you make it pretty and the music is lovely, maybe that will be good enough for me.
Yeah. I don't think it was. I wouldn't say it was a waste of my time either. I wish there was somebody more charismatic to play Sufi. It was a first time actor.
Yes.
Aditi Rao Haidari carried the scenes they were in together more than, like she did more than her share. And I felt kind of like bad that he wasn't giving much back.
And there has been, again, ironically, a lot of criticism of her performance. And I thought, apart from us not really understanding why she's mute and, suspecting that it's because they didn't want her to dub or she didn't want to dub. Apart from that, I find she is very pretty, but I do find she has a presence and a bit of charisma on screen. And I actually, I agree with you. I think she really did carry a lot of this film and made it worth watching.
She's so tiny and like bird boned, and like every time her husband yells at her and she kind of like folds up, you really feel for her and you kind of want to protect her. And I think in that sense, her being mute really like adds to your protectiveness about her.
I agree.
And the one criticism I did have is that I feel like sometimes, her physicality is very perfect for what I think they imagined this role to be, but I also think they just chose her because she's the fairest woman they could find to do this role. And maybe choices would have been different if that wasn't their priority.
I do get a little frustrated because I like her, and I find she's often I hate to use the word overlooked, but I do think she is chosen less often than actresses who might not be as good at her in the role. Like she was in Padmavati.
Mm-hmm.
Have I got that right? The Sanjay Leela Bhansali film.
Yeah, it's came out as Padmavat.
Lovely in that, but again, yes, thank you. It did so many name changes that I can never remember which one it was, but the film I'm talking about, and again, like a supporting role, but a character that I just like. I'm often, you're right. I feel like I want to protect her or help her, or there's a little bit of a fragility about her, even if she has some strengths. So I do think she was an interesting choice. We can quibble about whether there were better Malayalam actresses who could have taken. That's a whole other subject in Malayalam cinema. And including the dubbing, which is something that came up in. I was watching Big Brother, and I was lamenting the fact that yet again we had Vineet dubbing for a washed-up Hindi actor. When, why don't you just hire Vineet to play the role? And because I guess I watch enough now that as soon as I started watching, I went, "Is that Vineet?" But again, a whole can of worms that we can save for another day. So, do you want to sum up or move on to the next film?
I actually did have a few more things to say, just about Aditi Rao Haidari's career, which is that she's been working for a really long time. Her Wikipedia age is definitely wrong. The first time I saw her in a film was in Delhi 6, where she played Sonam Kapoor's aunt, Ramabua. And in that too, she had this like beautiful, wounded, fragile character, because she had a bad horoscope, or she had been married before. I think that she had been married before, and they couldn't find somebody for her to marry. And she was the quieter player against like Sonam's more bubbly character. She's a solid performer, Aditi Rao Haidari, and kudos to her, because I'm pretty sure she's in her 40s and she's playing a woman who's like in her early 20s, because she's drank from the eternal fountain of eternal youth.
And it's funny that you mentioned that now, because I'm thinking, oh, she's in her 20s, and she can't possibly be in her 20s.
No, she's not. She's and her Wikipedia age is 34, which she's definitely been in the business way, way longer than that. And the other aesthetic point I have to make is that it's one thing for Sufi's beard to look a little scraggly, but Jesu's beard also, they did not do any grooming to. And I think we're beyond this point in Malayalam cinema, guys. A man who has a PhD and lives in Dubai will have a much more beard oiled facial hair than what he was working with.
It was like everybody's COVID beard.
Yes, it was a COVID beard, exactly.
Mammootty shared pictures as well, and he had the same bushy COVID beard. And it's like, nobody's looking after themselves because nobody's
filming,
doing anything.
I really felt like they couldn't get a hair and makeup artist on set to do this, and they just let Jesue come in and do whatever he wanted because of his star power. And he was like, well, I'm not going to do anything to my beard. And my hair is going to be perfect, but my beard is just going to be scraggly and COVID. So,
although I wonder now when they were shooting, because some of we're going to talk about See You Soon in a little bit, and that was clearly shot during COVID times. So the difference, I guess, is when are films shot in COVID times and when are films just being released to OTT platforms because there is no cinema to release them to.
I think it might have been shot maybe right as things were closing down. Just looking at the timeline, it was released in July. It could definitely have still been shooting in, February or March, and in January, Kerala was already on higher alert. My parents went to Kerala in January 2020, and they were already being screened as they landed at the airport, things like that. So I think they were still working under some sort of restrictions when this film was shot.
And as you mentioned, films in this industry tend to be shot
very fast,
quickly and frequently. So it is very likely that, even Prithviraj got caught in Syria. Syria? They were shooting and got caught by COVID things. So, but it's just sort of, it was a thought that kind of popped into my head when we talked about his COVID beard. Because I think, it really does look clearly like a COVID beard.
Yeah. Prithviraj was in Jordan when the coronavirus outbreak.
Oh, yes.
So the next film we're going to talk about is Maniyarayile Ashokan, which was released on Netflix.
This is about Ashokan, played by Gregory, and Ashokan is very interested in the idea of getting married. And he's surrounded by people who are married or newly married, and the film deals a little bit with his frustration at the fact that he wants very much to be married. He dreams about being married. The film opens with him dreaming that he's married and they have twins, a plot point that will come into effect a little bit later on. So this is a man who is absolutely wants to find the woman of his dreams and arrange his marriage. His father tries to arrange marriage to the daughter of a family friend, and it doesn't work out. As we discover later, she has someone else she's in love with and interested in, but she tells her parents that it's because Ashokan is not particularly good looking or tall, and that's not what she wants. And he happens to overhear this, and it's very wounding for him. And as it obviously would be. But he discovers later on that there is actually someone who is interested in him, whose name is Shama. She watches him from afar as he's with his friends, as he's sort of bathing in the river. She draws portraits of him, and she hides them under a set of newspapers, which get picked up for recycling, and they end up in the hands of a little boy who starts taking the pages and making them into little boats. And one of Ashokan's friends finds the little boats that he and his girlfriend, who he later marries, realize that she's smitten with Ashokan. They get the two of them together. Her family is not pleased with the thought of Ashokan. Shama decides that she will threaten to self-harm if they don't let her marry him. So they go through with it. And as the families are meeting to look at the horoscopes, it's discovered that there's a problem in Ashokan's horoscope, and the woman he marries will die. Shama faints, the marriage is called off, Ashokan is heartbroken. He goes to another pundit to ask if there's anything that can be done, and there is. He needs to marry a tree. And I make that, I don't mean to make that sound very glib, because one of the thoughts that popped in my head when that came up was, the story about Aishwarya Rai and having the bad horoscope and them having to, marry her to the tree to break the curse of the horoscopes that she could later get married. That could be an apocryphal story. I don't know. But that's certainly a story that went around. So this is not beyond the realms of believability. The problem, of course, is he so wants to get married. He takes it so very seriously as his responsibility. So he chooses a tree. He goes through all the preparations. He marries the tree. And eventually he becomes so obsessed with the tree that when another opportunity to have his marriage arranged comes up, and this is hinted at in the beginning of the film because it is his actual wedding night, and the bride says, "I heard a rumor that you were married before." And so that the film sort of deals with the fact that Ashokan has been kind of married before, and what it does to his personality and how his friends respond to it, and how it gets resolved in the end.
Yeah, and I don't think you need to be afraid of seeming glib about him marrying the tree. The Mangalya Dosham superstition, it was made fun of even when Aishwarya Rai married her tree. So and in this movie, Ashokan hides it from everyone, his family and his friends, because he clearly understands they're going to give him a hard time about it. And he says to the astrologer, get married to a tree in this day and age. So it's clearly a source of ridicule even in the movie itself.
Yeah, I just want to be careful because I know that it could be something that I just imagine a story being picked up by an unthinking Western media outlet going, "Oh God, these people are marrying trees."
Yeah,
that's the idea I want to be very careful about here. Yes, you're right. The film does see this as superstition, and it does explore that superstition. To be honest, I had no idea that this was actually what the film was going to be about, and I found that really interesting. The other point I found, because we talked about Kumbalingi Nights in the previous episode, the other thing I found really interesting is when it becomes really clear that this is an obsession that is interfering with Ashokan's ability to live his real life and to get married to the next girl that the friends and family have arranged for him and they all think is eminently suitable for him. His friend takes him to a center where they do psychological counseling to help him out. So I don't think it's as successfully explored as in Kumbalingi Nights, but I did appreciate the fact that they did understand that this was an issue that was causing a block in Ashokan's ability to achieve what he really wanted in his life, to get married, and that it was something that could be appropriately dealt with in the right setting.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty refreshing too. They were very sensitive about the fact that Ashokan was, really attached to these plants, these saplings that became his kids.
His twins.
And it was really, I could, when you talk to people in their 20s or 30s and they're chronically single and they just want to find somebody, you can definitely see like this kind of thing getting into their head, because you go through like you'll try anything at that point to find somebody because you just not finding the right person. And after all of Ashokan's disappointments, it didn't seem such a reach that he would go marry a tree. Maybe just how like he would set a in his office and think about the tree was a little silly to me.
But in some ways, it was also kind of sweet that you can see that this is a man who it's not necessarily a big romance he's after. He's after a relationship that he can build, a family that he can build. And even if some aspects of what he's doing with the tree are a little, I mean, he's not doing anything. He's not doing anything odd with the tree.
This isn't like the Harry Potter diddling goats joke. This is not that. He's not diddling a tree.
No, but he's very respectful of the tree. I think my only quibble with the tree was that he chose the tree because it was slender and good looking. Yeah. And I thought, this is kind of rich from a man who's been dumped from an arranged marriage because he's small and short and not, terribly
light skinned,
handsome. Yeah. So I thought that was a little rich coming from him. But I do think it was sort of really sweet the way he wanted to look after the tree and look after the saplings.
Yeah, it was definitely played as if this is a man who just wants a relationship, wants someone who feels like that's his and he can feel like he's theirs, and he just kind of transfers all those emotions to the tree. There's a lot of comedy at the start with the jokes about like the banana plant, which is his wife, coming from Manasagudi, which is like I guess in Karnataka. And I kept waiting for like the woman who they kept talking about who sent the sapling or who sent the tree from Manasagudi to come back, because like there was a time when everyone in the village was chasing after her and she ran off to Karnataka, I guess, with the postman. So I kept hoping that the conclusion of the movie was that he would marry somebody like the Manasagudi woman's daughter or something like that, because that would have like really tied the points in together. But that is not what happens.
But that's actually a little cute plot point, because they open with that story of everyone being in love with this one woman, or being infatuated with this woman, and her running off with the postman, and the fact that her father has this hiccup punch.
Yeah.
And then throughout the movie, every time someone is thinking about this woman, including Ashokan's father, they have the hiccups, which was really cute and could have been. They managed to do it just enough to make it funny. Yes. Without it being overwhelming or too much. I thought it was there were some really small, cute little moments in this film.
Because there's this gang of friends and it's in a village. I was surprised there was, what you and some of the bloggers call comedy uncle character, like, because that person would have definitely been like hiccuping like throughout the entire movie.
Yes.
And like like falling off things because of the hiccups and stuff like that. They didn't go all the way there. They were very subtle about the joke about the hiccups.
Yes. And it came out at moments where you didn't really expect it, which made it quite funny. And I just want to go on the record saying I actually love comedy uncles and aunties. I mean, they exist in many film industries, and I understand why people might find them a bit much. And yes, sometimes they can be overutilized, but I really do love comedy uncles and aunties. I think they have their place in the right film in the right moment.
I agree. My biggest quibble with, I keep using the term biggest quibble, my somewhat negative feelings about them is that oftentimes they're the people who kept getting beat up in movies, like the hero will just randomly slap them, and maybe that is like because of that I have a negative perception of them. Like somebody like Jagadish Srikumar, who has probably gotten slapped in movies so often, like he's got his like slapping twirl just down to the T.
Yes.
But I like the idea of just a comedy person. There's always like a weirdo in the family, and
I think it's funnier if everybody just puts up with him than just somebody goes and slaps him.
Yeah, I would agree that, but I wanted to be really clear that because I see comedy uncles and aunties. My husband and I, watch Korean dramas and we watch Chinese movies and stuff, and they exist in those cultures as well. And I'm pretty sure if I pushed hard enough, I'd find comedy uncles and aunties in other industries in the West if I watched enough movies. But anyway, I just wanted to put that out there. This is another film produced by Dulquer.
Yes.
Which I got thinking about that when you talked about Friday Film House and maybe Jay Surya doing a favor for them. So Dulquer has his cameo, which he claimed to be very embarrassed about, but he's Ashokan's cousin who's in the Navy. So it gives us an excuse to have Dulquer show up at the end of the film dressed, in the Navy and give all the women a bit of a excuse to fan themselves if that's, appeals to them. But I find it really interesting what he chooses to produce and who he chooses to associate with. And I think that's been very clear from the beginning, because his debut film, Second Show, was very much not like you might expect for a debut film for the son of a big star. Pretty much it was Dulquer and his friends making a film together. Mammootty had no hand in it. Mammootty rarely talks about Dulquer or promotes his stuff online, which I find fascinating and refreshing at the same time. So in some ways, when I look at this and the previous film with Suresh Gopi and
Shobana.
Varanya
Avshamunda.
Directed by the son of
Satyanandikad?
Yes. The son of someone very known for not only for his, comedies, social comedies, but also very known for family dramas.
Satyanandikad's family dramas are famous, yeah.
Yes. So here we have the son of someone famous for family dramas doing family dramas, a family drama for his debut film, produced by the son of Mammootty. I mean, a star in his own right now. So I find Dulquer's choices about productions really interesting. And this one too, I mean, Gregory he's been, a sidekick in lots of Dulquer's films. He's not someone who you would traditionally think of as a leading man, except he's sort of perfect for this little Ashokan role. And a lot of people complained, well, he's no Sobenshire. Well, no, he's not. And I don't think he's meant to be. And I think actually he kind of has the kind of little sad sack personality. He isn't star glamour, but neither is Ashokan.
Yeah.
So I just find these choices that Dulquer is making as he turns to I found his choices as an actor interesting. I find his choices as a producer interesting as well. And I wonder, what will he do next?
So Mammootty famously has a reputation for not having his crew and his clique of people the way Mohanlal does. Like, Mammootty's a lot more willing to work with different kinds of people. I actually think it's interesting how Dulquer always has, how tight he is with Jacob Gregory and Sonny Wayne, who both play his cousins in this movie. And the fact that, obviously he wanted them in this because of how close their careers have been. Well, Dulquer has been a hero. And I think Dulquer has a little bit more of a clique than Mammootty does. And let's talk about Jacob Gregory's career, going from a Kairali TV serial. I was watching Akkade Karchiko on Kairali TV, 15 years ago when it was airing, and Jacob Gregory played a character called Giri Giri, because the uncle on the show didn't know how to pronounce Gregory. And he played.
Yeah, and I'm going to I'm going to interject this for a minute. I've been calling him Gregory because that's what all the production stuff has called him. So I'm glad you actually are referring to him as Jacob Gregory, because I was doing that until I went, well, they're obviously not doing that anymore. So just to be clear that he is Jacob Gregory, but the production stuff for this one has just called him Gregory.
Yeah, so I think part of the reason they just call him Gregory is because of his first big role, which was playing Gregory in Nakarakaitiko. I don't know if he goes by Jacob in his personal life or before his acting career, but I call him Jacob Gregory, but same person, Gregory, or Giri Giri, is what people called him right as he was starting off his film career.
Yep.
Yeah, it was cool. It's cool that he's like he spent some time in America, like where he went after he immigrated to America as an adult and then like came back and had this great career, which is nice to see.
Yeah, and I do think there's a place for these smaller sounds terrible, but actors who are effective at what they do, and everybody knows what their strengths are and works, because I think this film works to who he is, what he can do, what his strengths are. It doesn't demand more of him. And again, I mean, I don't have an issue with that as long as everything else in the film works together, hangs together. And I do find it very interesting, as I said, that Dulquer is this is how he's making his career choices.
Yeah, it's he's not making those urban films that you would expect somebody like him who has urban image to be making. He's making those films, I think, that are, Mammootty has this reputation for being like a farmer's son, and like he loves farming. So yeah, I think there's I always hear Dulquer talking about going back to like their ancestral home and stuff like that. So he clearly has some sort of attachment to village life, and yeah, it's a very pleasing film.
Yes, thank you, because I heard so much negativity about the film before I watched it. And I've watched it twice now to try and prepare for this. And I liked it. It wasn't groundbreaking, but I found it kind of sweet and enjoyable. My husband watched it the first time with me, and he enjoyed it. And I think there's a place for films like that, little films that aren't terribly pretentious and they're not going to break a lot of ground, but they tell a little simple story, and they do it, and it hangs together, and you go at the end with a small smile on your face and say, well, that was a nice way to spend my time.
I think the only the issue I had is that there was a song for like every woman who passed through the movie, and there was a lot of slow motion, so it could have been a lot of that could have been more efficiently cut. This was a big soundtrack for a Malayalam film. Malayalam movies don't have these many songs typically.
Yeah.
And they were fairly generic songs. I didn't feel like, oh my God, what a catchy tune to any of them.
Yeah, but again, for me, it's a bit like the film. They were nice. They didn't offend my ear. But you're right. They will not be earworms at any point. They will not be things that I constantly come back to again and again. My only quibble, sorry, that is my word. My only small issue is I may be in a minority, but I don't want to hear Dulquer sing.
I don't want to hear...
And I don't want to hear the auto-tune.
I don't want to hear Dulquer. I don't want to hear Prithviraj. I don't want to hear Nazriya. Any of them sing. I feel like Nazriya is more qualified than the other two, but like I got so sick of the time when Prithviraj would sing in every movie of his. And like, this is so clearly auto-tuned.
And I think that's what puts me off, is I can hear the auto-tuning and I'm like, oh, I hate that. Like, auto-tuning has a very, very small purpose, and if you have to use it to make someone sound good, it just sounds... So that's my issue. People may disagree with me. I do understand why they do it, because I think it can be easier to promote a little bit, because I don't know about you, but I see the people on my Twitter timeline who are mad for DQ, and I think they will instantly hook into something. Oh, he's singing, I will watch that. Oh, it's from this film and he's produced it, I'll watch that. So I do think that if they're using it for that purpose, I understand why, But yeah, I can live without that.
Same. I agree. The subtitles on this on Netflix was very, very bad. It was translating from a different script entirely. There were parts where, they're talking about Rani and Radisha's relationship. Radisha is one of the main character's friends, in his group of in his friend circle. And Radisha is newly married.
Yeah, he's the one that takes him to the center to get some help.
Yes, he's an auto rickshaw driver, and he's married to a teacher. But every time they talk about their relationship, people are asking them, "Hey, do you have any good news? I.e., is Rani pregnant?" But instead, the way the subtitles translated it is, "When are you guys gonna get married?" And it was it wasn't like the. I think them being newly married made a huge difference in terms of how it affected Jacob Gregory's character, Ashokan.
Yeah. I was confused by that, and I had to go because at the beginning they're not married at the beginning, and she says something to him about he has to learn his 7 times tables, and she'll marry him.
So,
but then they quite obviously are married.
They are married by the time she tells him about the 7 times table. Pretty much any day, any time we see her and him after the. Her giving him the coconut sapling, they've been married, but the subtitles don't capture that.
Yeah, okay. Because I missed out on that, and I was obviously a little bit confused and had to go back and figure out because you're right. There was a point where they were clearly married, but there's this middle ground where it's a little muddled about are they, aren't they? Yeah, I have, and these are my frustrations because when. There are moments when I clue in without the subtitles, but those are so few and far between. So it really does show you how subtitling can make a huge difference in people's understanding of the film.
Yes, and now that when I'm watching films, I also watch them from, do you think Catherine would understand this? And I was reading, so I was like, I had to turn on the subtitles at some point because they kept translating it wrong and it was annoying. And from the beginning, they were translating a lot of things wrong. And I was like, this is like a completely different plot happening in the subtitles than what's going on screen.
But I do see, some decent, legitimate subtitlers out there who get very frustrated at sometimes how, as I mentioned earlier, how streaming services might strip off decent subtitles and put their own on. And I did get that bit about the good news. Yeah. Or, have you got any the implication was they're looking for proof of grandchild or something. Yeah. But yeah, I do think there is a lot that I miss. Even somebody like me who has been watching these movies for a very long time.
I understand, somebody hired by the movie to subtitle being annoyed about Amazon stripping away the subtitles, but to be honest, I've gotten kind of spoiled by the consistency and quality of Amazon Prime subtitling that the Netflix subtitling or whoever subtitled the version on Netflix was hard for me to accept, and like this is a lower quality than what I have gotten used to from Amazon Prime.
I would very much like to talk about Halal Love Story. I'm going to be very sort of minimalist to talk about halal and haram as concepts in Islam, which are things that are forbidden in the Muslim faith, and halal, things that are not forbidden, or that are permitted. So that gives you an idea of the title, Halal Love Story, a love story that conforms to this notion of what's permitted in Islam. So we have this community in Kerala, and the central character of Rahim, who's a member of this kind of progressive social organization that works, part of the work they do is to combat Islamophobia. And when the film opens, they're editing a video documentary kind of thing about the attacks on 9/11. And the 9/11 attacks and American imperialism are one of these little threads that goes through the film. But he is kind of sad at the fact that he watches a guy putting up film posters and, there's a little flesh. And he's kind of sad that what they see in the movies are things that are not halal. And he wants to see his community represented in the media that they are permitted to consume. And I think that's a really strong core in this movie, and the whole navigation of how to make a film that will be acceptable to your community, that will represent your community, and you have to deal with people who are questioning the things you're trying to do as part of making that film. So that's kind of the core of it all. Rahim goes to a man named Tawfiq, who's recognized in the community as both someone who loves film, but he's also very accepted within the community, and they think that any idea that comes from Tawfiq will be proved by the community organization. So essentially they set out to make this film. And I love the idea of films within films. And it's sort of interesting to see the things they have to navigate as a community. Like, for example, they're going to have a husband and wife in the film, so they want a real life husband and wife to play those roles so that it will be acceptable and that it will be a halal love story. And it's how the community comes together to do this film.
And I got the sense from the list that we made that this was going to be your favorite from the list. Is that correct?
I actually, when I saw the promotions come out for this film, I was actually, once we got the idea of film within a film, I went, okay, that's right up my alleyway. I like that. You also have, people in the film that I like, actors in the film that I like very much, particularly Indrajit as Sharif, the husband, who works as an actor in a theater troupe, and he participates in these street things that do these little acts, these little plays about the American imperialism stuff. At one point, he's playing George Bush, and he's got a suit on, and they joke about how, he better stay clear of where they're going to burn the effigy. And Grace Anthony is his wife, Surah. I really love when you have these extended casts where you have everyone at every level has a little role, a little part, but it's all sort of significant to the whole. So yes, I anticipated that this would be a film I would like very much, and I crossed my fingers because sometimes I watch films and I'm really looking forward to them, and I end up profoundly disappointed. And for me, I wasn't in this case.
It's a very typical community coming together to make a big project movie, and I think that's always a heartwarming, feel-good experience. And I think like obeying Islamic law is the point of the film, but I think part of it is like making it so that they have to conform to these laws of their faith also makes sets up challenges in the plot that they as a community have to come together to solve, and it's most often solved by people being good-natured and generous and things like that. The organization they're a part of is an Islamic anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist organization. So, for example, there's a scene in which two characters are shown drinking alcohol, but obviously none of the actors can drink alcohol, so they're served Coca-Cola. But because this is an anti-capitalist organization, the actors say, no, nobody here drinks Coca-Cola. And so then, like, the assistant director, who is, as in this movie, quote unquote mainstream, as in they're not an observant Muslim, goes and finds them some black teas that they can pretend is alcohol.
Yes. And I thought that was a nice little moment too, because you expect them to object to the alcohol. But then, the next thing is we add on to that with the Coke. And I thought that was really funny, just this extra little layer of something that's important to this community, in tandem with their own religious beliefs. But I found it interesting too that they're very realistic when they go about organizing this film. Like Tawfiq for someone who loves film and goes to the point of writing films, he's very honest when he says to them, we can only do this. We can only, do this TV. We have to set our sights at a reasonable level so we can succeed. Rather than someone, like usually when people want to make movies, it's they have this big dream and the pie in the sky and they want to do it all. And it's like they have constraints on what they can do, and they're very well aware of that. And they need to all work within that to make this happen.
And I thought it was interesting how they were talking about the kind of movies that were available to them versus the kind of movies they wanted to see. So they talked about, obviously, the lewd, licentious movies of the mainstream, but also they were talking about The Message and Lion of the Desert, which both star Anthony Quinn for some reason. And they said, and Iranian films, and they were like, yeah, but that's not got nothing to do with our day-to-day life. So we the films that we want to see have to do with our day-to-day lives, not grand epics or vulgarity, as they would consider it.
Yeah, and I think that was the key point for me, and we've talked about this before, about people really do want to see themselves represented in the media they consume. I think many forms of media are getting better at that. I'm certainly seeing it in other places that I'm interested in, like children's books, where when I first became a teacher librarian many, many years ago, representation of anything in children's books, it was there, but it was minimal. And now that I'm going back and looking at what's available, I'm seeing so many different communities and cultures represented. And I think it's just making the broader cultural product more rich. I mean, this is not quite that. This is just a community saying we really want we want to watch movies, but what you're making available to us doesn't strike any chord within us.
Yeah, there is no nobody in this movie is trying to have a mainstream acting career. Even Sharif, who is like the actual actor in the movie, he's just trying to do. He just wants to take a break from street theater to do something on screen. He's not trying to do any other movies because he's very aware it would be against his faith to do more mainstream movies. It's kind of, you don't really see scripts like this where people are very aware of their limits and don't have extreme dreams. They're just trying to do something in a very limited space. And I don't think most movies, but especially Malayalam movies of this day and age, they have a sort of, we're going to take this tiny hotel and make it into like a popular destination for people, or my dad's lost his business, I'm going to build another business and I'm going to make it super successful. This doesn't have that same vibe. It's very much like, this is just the project we're doing as a community, and that's the end of it. And it's very sweet. Everything about this movie is so sweet. Sharafuddin, who is often, unfortunately, a comedy uncle in a lot of movies, or he's done a lot of villain roles at this point too, I think. He plays this like very genteel writer and teacher who just wants to do something for his community. And everybody in this movie is very sweet. Or except maybe Indrajit and like the director. They might only be the like rougher characters.
It was interesting though to see the director and his personal problems sort of in contrast to what was going on in terms of the making of the film. And I didn't feel that they let that overwhelm anything. There were a lot of little things like that. Like when they bring Parvati in as the acting coach. A little moment where they're bringing the community together to try and get them to loosen up a little bit in their performances. That was the moment that kind of triggered the conflict between the husband and wife. And the fact that he has to accept that actually she may be better than him at this, which is something that he does, was really interesting to see them struggle with, as well as the concerns she had about an event around her father's death, and something that Sharif said that she disagreed with it. It was something she just kind of buried. And it's a moment where it comes to the surface, and the two of them have to deal with this. And it becomes obvious to the director that there's a problem between the two of them. I loved that moment where he's saying there's something off about them, and everybody's like, what, really? And he's like, look through the camera. And it's that moment on, I wrote a piece once on the use of cameras in children's literature, and how the device of a camera allows you to pull in and focus on something, and to see it reflected in this film. Like, I see this through the camera. I see that this is a problem, and I see it's causing a problem for the film. But more importantly, it's a problem between this couple that needs to be resolved.
And I also thought the director's interest in sort of in making sure that Sohra and Sharif's marriage don't fall apart because of the movie is in some ways him trying to cope with his own marriage, which has, I mean, it's clearly not just the movies, it's the drinking, it's his sort of lifestyle that is not compatible with his wife's. He's kind of trying to like direct a movie but also direct their life. There's a lot of they're playing with that idea a lot.
And I'm coming back to Sobhan Shire again, because I loved him as the sound director. And this could have been a role where he stole it out from everybody and ruined the film. And they didn't allow that to happen. But it's so funny that he's doing his sound director stuff, and he hears the woman beating her laundry, and they have to run off and get her to stop doing the laundry. Or he hears a chicken or a rooster. And he's so highly strung. Like, sound is his life. I just thought there were like these little moments in this film that were dropped in, that added to it, that were quite funny or sweet, and that were never allowed to take over the film.
The assistant directors running around the neighborhood trying to quiet people is such a hilarious montage. It was genuinely like I was giggling throughout the entire montage, because they just like showed up in such awkward situations to stop the noise. And there's something very guileless about the one assistant director who was sent out first. Like, every expression he gave was very charming, and I need to find that actor's name, because he was very charming to me. The whole group of assistant directors was, they were kind of a good mix of extremely sincere about movies, but also just kind of potheads and alcoholics, and trying to work with these extremely religiously observant people. It was it was a good contrast, especially in the scene when one group is praying and the other group is getting high and smoking cigarettes in the backyard.
Well, and it comes to sort of a head at the film's climax. I'm going to be careful about how much I give away here, but they want the couple to hug. And there's this whole question about, is this permissible? Is this not permissible? I love the fact that they have a whole discussion about it. I love the fact that the husband and wife go back and have a discussion about it. And I love the fact that the director is, well, we chose a husband and wife to play husband and wife so that all of this would be acceptable. And I love the fact that there is a movie answer to how to solve this conundrum that they're all dealing with. But I also love the fact that it's a moment where the husband and wife are sitting and they're talking about the fact, like, do we ever hug unless it means sex? Like, I thought, how good is it that they are having this discussion together? Because they could have been very sort of prudish about, well, they're a very, religious couple and they're very devout and we're not going to deal with this. I think I love the fact that they were showing that this is sort of a universal thing. Do we how do we share our feelings for each other, and sort of them struggling to the realization that maybe it's okay if we hug and it doesn't mean any more than we care for each other or we're happy to see each other. I thought that was a really, lots of little things in this film. Nothing overwhelmed anything else. Nothing was a big issue. Lots of little issues that are important to these people.
Exactly. Unlike a lot of films, and especially maybe in this group of films that we're looking at, there is no high stakes in this movie. I mean, yes, if you think about it as we have to correct the image of Muslims in Kerala, but that's not what this movie is trying to achieve. It's just trying to put out a product, and just have it be added to the conversation. There is no high stakes in this movie, and I think that makes it very enjoyable to watch in a time of pandemic.
Yeah. Well, and I think the film does what the community is trying to do with their own film. Just show how they are. This is how we are. We want to see ourselves as we are. We don't want to see these misrepresented images. The film is not really setting out to do that per se, but it manages to do it anyway. And it's not a big, it's a lovely little film.
I would also say that I never chose a side between Zohra and Sharif. Yes, Sharif was like a little full of himself in terms of like, I'm the better actor, but everything he felt I understood and everything she felt I understood. So I thought it was a very, there was a part of me that read the story and went in expecting a domineering, arrogant husband. But that is not what it was. I think, this entire movie was, for Sharif at least, was the arc of like the little checklist he does every night of making sure he's actually honest with himself about whether he is fulfilling his duties to his wife.
And there is a moment where he's looking at the checklist and he can't make the check mark. He could be, like we see him every night, check, 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 check. He could just go ahead and do that. But he is honest enough to pause and then put the book down and not make the check mark. And I agree with you. I think I could understand where they were both coming from. So it was really interesting to see. I did feel bad for both of them through their misunderstandings. And I felt really happy when they managed to work through that together.
The other thing I enjoyed about this movie and Sufiyum Sujatayum was the appreciation for Mamakoya in this era of Malayalam cinema. He is no longer just this like man who speaks in a Malabar dialect, which for the longest time he was just that character in Malayalam cinema. Now he gets to be that, but he gets to be a more authentic version of that. And it's a pleasure to watch him on screen. And I brighten up a little whenever he shows up in a movie.
Yeah, I love to see him in a film, and I did love that little character where they're trying to raise. They're given the permission to make the film, but they're given no money. But they're given permission to go and raise money, and the whole conversation with him about that they're coming to him for the money and what's the nature of the money. Again, another one of those roles that was put in there that adds to the film, that doesn't take anything away from it. And I agree with you. I love when I see him in a film. Him and Indrans.
Yes.
Like I will often watch a film if it has either one of the two of them in it, just for them, even if the role is tiny.
And in both the scenes that Mama Koya showed up, we did actually get to hammer out some of the views of this organization. That he's an entrepreneur, so he is not a capitalist, and that we don't drink Coca-Cola because it's imperialist, and all those points also, maybe realize we don't see those anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist views represented in Malayalam cinema separate from a communist or Marxist story.
And that they didn't mention, I mean, a lot of people in the Malabar region do vote for CPM, the Communist Party of India Marxist, but these people are clearly basing their ideology based off religion rather than Marxist writings. And so I thought that was interesting, and I've never seen that before.
It was also interesting to see that they could be opposed to this imperialist outreach and not be extremists.
Yes.
Because all too often that's the stereotype. This is one part of their lives, and it's important to them to confront this in their lives, in their belief. But it was really refreshing that they weren't extremists.
You know, this also, in some ways, felt like, because we there's a lot of dialogue in the movie about doing your duty to the organization. And a lot of the duties of the organization are showing up for a protest, burning an effigy. And it's all those shots of like masses of brown people in foreign countries, from an American perspective, burning effigies of American leaders. And in some ways, this is pulling back, and they're not just these bodies in a crowd angry at America. That these are people with home lives, and they have reasons for what they believe.
Yep.
And yet, you can kind of tell that some people are also like over talking about the imperialism, because there's that scene where everybody's sitting at a auditorium, and the guy is like going on and on about the children of Iraq. And everybody seems a little bored, but they so that those are again nice touches woven in very subtly.
Yep.
And yes, low stakes.
But yes, you were right. I did like this film a lot. And I was so grateful that I did, because I did not want to be disappointed, as I very often am when I get my hopes up about a film. So that takes us to See You Soon. I will let you introduce this.
Okay. See You Soon is a story about Jimmy, who is a expat Malayali living in Dubai. He meets a girl on Tinder, and he falls really hard for her within a week. Proposes to her over a video call, even though he's not met her in person. And his mom is obviously on the video call as well. And his mom is like, what's going on? This is so fast. But she still like agrees, because that's her only son. And his mom is in America while he's in Dubai. So she asks his cousin in Bangalore to check this girl out. And the cousin is some sort of cybersecurity expert, and he says that he has looked through all her stuff online, and he gives the go-ahead for the wedding, or at least for the mom to like make a proposal to her family. But in the meantime, the girl is beaten up by someone. She says it is her father. And she asks Jimmy to come get her from her home. And then she disappears from Jimmy's home after living with him for a week. So the rest of the movie is sort of, we're finding out her backstory. I was going to say it's like Searching, but then I didn't want to make that comparison yet.
Well, I mean, we can make the comparison to Searching in the use of technology on screen. Certainly there's that similarity. Whether we can make any other connections, I don't know. I haven't seen Searching, but based on the images I've seen, that's the kind of thing. And we should say that one of the kind of selling points of this film was that they made it under lockdown conditions. Fahad Fazil, who plays the cybersecurity expert, rented a whole apartment so that everybody could be in the apartment and shoot safely, conforming to, COVID guidelines. So that's one of the interesting things about the film.
Right.
It made a huge buzz on the internet, and I watched it, and I'm going to be quite honest, I kind of went, okay, I really didn't connect with the film. And I think interestingly enough, I was concerned that I might be overwhelmed by all the technology appearing on screen, because we get like screenshots. And I actually thought that was reasonably well handled. I never felt overwhelmed by that at any time, and I could have. One place the film fell down for me was I guessed fairly early on what was going on with this woman. So then the whole film played out to confirm what I'd already guessed, and it left me a little flat in terms of storytelling. I mean, I can't judge it any other way. Would I have liked it more if I had not twigged to what was going on with her? I was also very angry at Jimmy's reaction. I found Kevin's reaction more interesting, more sympathetic than, Jimmy is supposed to have fallen madly in love with this girl, and all he can say is, I don't want to do a spoiler, but the comment he makes about her, I thought, you're victim blaming.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're angry for some reason. That really put me off.
So I will say, in his defense, he didn't know. I think we can spoil it. Is that okay?
Well, it has been out. I'm sort of, let's put it this way. If anyone feels they're going to be spoiled, we're going to talk about it now.
Okay, so spoiler alert. I don't think Jimmy knew it when he shouted at Kevin that she was trafficked. I think he only knew that she was a sex worker. And at least the way I read the film was that she had gone on Twitter to try to find somebody who could get her out of the situation. But it could have also read as, there are sex workers on Tinder. So that she was trying to find clients online. So I feel like Dubai is kind of known for being a sex for sale city. People who've gone to nightclubs say it's very out there, and it's obvious that when women are sex workers. And so you're going to a club to have a good time, but you're also you might see some sex workers very obviously working there. And for a dating site, that might also be the case, that there's a lot of mix between romance and sex work. So that is what I understood it to be. To be fair, this is my favorite movie of the lot. I really enjoyed it. There weren't any times when I could take my eye off the screen, which wasn't the case for any of the other films, and it isn't the case for most films. I felt like I had to sit and watch everything that was happening. It was a very brisk film. It's only 98 minutes, and I didn't think any of that time was wasted.
No, that's true, and I will agree with you on that. That the editing was very efficient, and again, it comes down to, because I kind of had seen this before, whether in the news or in other films, I twigged very early. And I think you could be very correct that my perception colored every reaction of what happened. So I am probably, and I will freely admit this, I'm probably not the best judge for this film at all. And that's okay.
Jimmy certainly isn't flawless, though. We know that he jumps from one relationship to the other.
There are hints that he's had some troubles before.
Yes, that he's had trouble with the cops before. And that, honestly, I was a little more sketched out that the first reaction that he had when she disappeared and the cops came was not so much concern for her as much as it was, he's going to go to jail.
Yeah, I think my bottom line was I was kind of dissatisfied with him as a character. And again, that might be because I had this perception early on, and that colored everything else in the film for me. Fahad Fazil is... I couldn't take my eyes off the screen anytime he was on and doing his thing. He really is compelling. Even just to sit there and sort of be a screenshot on a computer, he's really compelling. And that's kind of fascinating.
Absolutely. I found the fact that he's always played, he's been really good at switching from like these naive village characters to these slightly urban guys who use women. And this is one of the in the second pool, but he got to be the one who got to sympathize with the trafficking victim, which I didn't know if that was because he's the producer. We got another producer star in this movie. But yeah, there's a scene in Searching as well, which is this movie is very comparable to, where where we get the big reveal where the dad finally gets like a load of data and he's like clicking through it and he finds his daughter's videos and what she's and the communications where he realizes where she's gone. And in the same way, there's a big reveal moment where we're just looking at Fahad going through files. And I don't know if there's a different way to do a computer screen movie. If, where you just don't go through a giant folder of information and that reveals things.
Well, I mean, it's certainly a device I've seen in other films that kind of depend on computer screen use. So, I mean, I don't have any objections to that. And as I said at the beginning, I worried that I would feel overwhelmed by it all. And I found that it really did add to the intensity of what was going on. And I do find it fascinating because I'm, of a generation coming to a lot of this stuff late. A lot of it isn't something my generation participates in. So I sort of see it secondhand. And I really did worry that I was going to lose interest because it was a world that I know only from the very surface. So I did find it very intriguing and very compelling to watch people connecting in ways that I don't. And the tools they use and how it is fascinating to see how wired we all are on some level. Yes. And the fact that there's so many cameras, they switch from like a phone camera to a computer camera. It was, that there's actually, or a CCTV, that there's so many ways in which cameras are capturing human life on a daily basis. Yes, yeah. The thing that is probably most impressive to me about this film is that that this was shot so quickly. I think I wrote down how many days it was shot over. I thought something like 10 days, but it really was. Yeah. So yeah, they finished shooting on August 21st, and then this was released on September 1st. So the turnaround time on the editing was really, really fast. Even for Malayalam cinema, that's a really quick turnaround time. Yeah, and what I did find really interesting about this was the aspect that I found very interesting about the film was how fast they put it together. And even though there were parts that I was disappointed with, I think the film as a whole, to be done in that quick a time under the constraints of COVID shooting, really is an interesting feat. I wrote down this note to myself that this didn't need to be as good as it turned out to be for what it was, which was an effort to prove that A, we could make films under COVID restrictions, B, a computer screen film, and C, make money for film workers. So that, under those conditions, it didn't need to be as solid a film as it turned out to be. Yeah, and I mean, my complaints are really quite personal. And again, if I hadn't kind of twigged to certain things, would I have felt differently? And I get, when films are made and they're sloppy, and I get angry. And this was not that. This is, I'm not trying to say that this was a bad film, a sloppy film, or in any way, shape, or form. I agree with you. I think there were parts of this film that are very compelling, in both the storytelling and in the production. I found the production side more compelling for me than the story side. I do wonder, one of the questions I asked myself as we were thinking about these 4 films, which are really the first 4 that went straight to streaming platforms, one of the questions I had for each of them was, how would they have fared at the box office? Does See You Soon become more compelling because it's designed in a way that makes it very compatible with going straight to streaming in terms of, the type of world that we live in?
I think See You Soon would have done well in multi-screen theaters, simply because of FUD. Just like I think Maniyarayile Ashokan would have done fine because of Dulkar. I don't think the other two would have done as well.
No, and I think I agree with you. As much as I love Halal Love Story, it's such a little film, and I think it's the kind of little film that is hard to find a place for. So I think it may have, we're just doing crystal ball stuff here because who knows? If I could predict what films would be successful, I'd be doing something other than what I'm doing now. And simply the fact that I reacted in different ways, I often react different than what sort of the majority thinking is with my media, which is okay because it means those little niche films are for me, and at least they have an audience. But I do agree with you. I think See You Soon probably would have done a lot better than any of the other films. I went to see Bangalore Days in the theater, and this was just when Fahad was really getting hot. And it was when he appeared on screen in that, the whole audience stood up and cheered and clapped. And it was the first time I'd seen that for him. I'd seen it for Mohanlal, I'd seen it for Mammootty. It was the first time I'd seen it from anyone of like the new generation. Mm-hmm. So I agree. I think he has a hold on the audience that would have just, whatever the material, would have had them coming out for him.
Yeah, and they might have made some different choices. Maybe they wouldn't have made him, curse out his boss / hookup. If it was for a theatrical release, they might have made slightly different choices just because you have to make it more appropriate for a theater audience. But it was funny to me that she called the entire family complete misogynists. And it's a very messy relationship. There's, they very much have a love-hate relationship, and they use each other for sex. And he feels like she takes a lot of credit for his work, but then you don't know because the reputation of men who work for female bosses and not respecting them. So there's a lot of things to dig through in their interactions. And I liked the way the servant moved through his life very quietly while he's sleeping. And this is how in big cities, typically servants, it's not like or it used to be in Kerala. It's harder now because you can't find, most people aren't domestic servants. Domestic servants don't live with people a lot anymore. But yeah, in big cities, they just kind of come in for an hour or two and then they do their thing and they leave. If this was a more typical Malayalam cinemas, you would have seen that maid in Bangalore Days who interferes with the life of the person living in the house. This is very much not that. And I always want, I think that, the closest we get to sort of the perspective of this sort of underclass of big cities is Dobigad. Is where you this class of servants / helpers to middle class and upper middle class and upper class people who just I want to see more movies from that perspective of what do they think of the people they work for. I used to be one of the people who had a servant when I was living in Bombay. So yeah, I was I'm sure she had thoughts about me and my lifestyle that weren't flattering, or maybe she didn't think about me at all. So I want to see movies like that from that perspective. As he was cleaning up, I kept thinking, I wonder what he's thinking of this guy who sleeps in the daytime.
I know, and then that was one of the moments though where I'm showing my adverse reactions to technology when I was like, dude, turn your camera off. Except we wouldn't have a movie. But you're right. It does give us that little moment where you watch him. He goes to sleep, and then the servant comes through and is doing his thing and looks into the camera too at one point, or is looking at the computer. Like we see him looking at one point while he's going about his things.
I think that was I saw it as a way to acknowledge the camera is on in the movie as well. It's not just the camera is on. For, like outside the movie, it's on in the movie as well, and you kind of feel like he's about to do something suspicious, but all he's doing is just taking the money because like this guy is always asleep. He's not gonna pay him normally, so he just leaves the money in his wallet like that. So what did you think about this movie being set in Dubai?
Well, I mean, it you talked earlier about the sex trade in Dubai, and there have been films made too about women who go to the Gulf to work as servants and who end up abused in the households. So this is something I have seen before, and it certainly gives them the jumping off point to explore that. I often find the Middle East kind of and the Gulf states kind of perplexing to me. So I'm not sure, beyond that. It's certainly something I've encountered before in Malayalam films, this connection to Dubai and to the other Gulf states.
Yeah, I guess I was also wondering if you made anything. So, is there a reason it was set in Dubai? Is it because, obviously there's the distance from the homeland, but also the fact that in some ways it's more liberal than living in India, but also the actual legal framework is that you can't live together before you're married. And I felt like that might be a justification for why it was set in Dubai.
Well, yeah, and as I said, it gives them the framework to have the film play out as it does.
Yeah, I was wondering what it would look like if they set in Bangalore, but then I was like, that's way too close to Kerala, and you wouldn't have the element of having the passport taken away.
And it does, again, it's another excuse for them to add a layer of online connection in. Because everyone is because they are so set, the mother is in the States, and Fahad's character is in Bangalore, and Jimmy is in Dubai. Their method of communication is online. So that already fits into the framework of the film. And, that seems to be, like, the people I know have this disparate connection, whether their family is in India, in the US or Canada, in the Gulf states, and it's an online connection that everybody is already familiar with. Mm-hmm. So it just sort of adds to the realistic underpinning of the story.
Yeah, I think it also, the same way I felt about Searching, it's there's so much about what is seen through your digital contact versus what is happening in the background that you can't see. Anybody who's dated online will know how you become really close very quickly because you might be talking like all day, but then you realize you don't really know the person because you haven't met them in real life. You haven't, you don't know what components make up their life outside of this digital connection. And obviously Jimmy being a love-struck fool who falls too hard. It was very Romeo and Juliet, the timeline of their romance. Everything happened within 2 weeks. It makes sense that he doesn't think that, there's anything suspicious going on with her. And he just kind of believes her a lot.
I think our human nature is to want to believe people and want to believe the face they're presenting to us. And I think a lot of times online, that is the case. What you see is what you get. The pitfall with the technology is wonderful because it allows us to connect with people. During COVID times, it's been a lifesaver for many people. But like any tool, it can be misused and misrepresented. And even though I think the number of people doing that would be a much smaller percentage, they exist.
Yeah, and I also think it was interesting that the minute things got difficult, Jimmy's mom sent him a ticket to America and told them to get out. Like he definitely gives off a very spoiled brat vibe, and I there was a lot of layers to him in this movie that we didn't get fully because obviously we were looking at him through this computer screen, but it was very clear that there's a lot of sub stories that could have been explored if this was a more conventionally shot film.
And in some ways, I'm actually glad they didn't do that because they allowed it to be very crisp in that hour and a half runtime.
Yeah, exactly. It exactly, and I didn't want it explored in this film. But I was thinking that just dropping those hints and moving along really added to the crispness. And I'm thinking about why that's different than, say in Sufiyum Sujatayum, where they're talking about, the henna, when the henna tree blooms, you will speak. Like why some threads being dropped are okay, but other threads don't feel quite as fulfilling.
I don't know if there's an answer to that, but it's quite interesting. It's something I do think about a lot.
Maybe digging a little bit more into how I feel is that you have to, a part of it is that when it's a thread that you're just throwing in there and it doesn't have a conclusion, it has to fill out the character or the story in some way. And I think we get that in See You Soon. But that little comment about Sujata being able to speak doesn't fill her out in any way. And maybe that's the difference, I speculate.
Well, it is sometimes frustrating when a detail is thrown out, like the henna tree, where you think that could be a really beautiful image. And it's just part of a story that's being, again, they want us to believe in this sweeping mythical love story, and they're adding these little mythical elements, but they don't really come to fruition, and they don't really add or make a compelling case for this to be a grand mythological love story. Whereas, as you've said, with See You Soon, they're just little character markers, and they're just little additions to things that we can take away from the film.
I did like the way the embassy and the consulate and the Indian government were portrayed. I think the Indian foreign minister is one of the few heroes to come out of this Modi era. So it was, Sushma Swaraj, who was the former external affairs minister, was, a very popular person when she was serving in that role. It kind of makes sense that, she gets, the foreign office gets to be this heroic figure in this movie, and the embassy, the consulate staff treat the trafficking victims really well and kind of make sure that they get some justice, which is usually not how the Indian government is portrayed in movies.
Yeah, I did, even though I kind of guessed where this film was going, I was still kind of heartbroken by it. There's nothing to resolve. This is a thing that happens to women, and it just makes me profoundly sad and kind of grateful in the way that at least this is one woman that managed to escape it.
Yeah, there's a lot of, they did give us a few scenes of Anu's pain at, being forced into sex work, being sexually assaulted, and sort of how her family was afraid to ask people for help because they couldn't tell people what was happening to her. And there were a lot of layers to it. And I went back to the case of the Sujatayum girl who's a woman now, who was trafficked as a teen in the same way within Kerala. and has for almost 3 decades now, been socially isolated from her community because she made accusations against a very powerful politician. And I went back and read some articles about her because this movie kind of made me think about trafficking. And yes, there's a special situation when you go to a foreign country where the passport might be taken away. But obviously, this is something that the story could have been set in India as well, and with different contours, but essentially the same story has happened in India as well many times.
Do we want to have anything to tie up today? Some conclusions? Because we've spent a long sweep going over these 4 straight to streaming releases.
Yeah, this has been an interesting year to watch movies get released online first. And I know there's some protest and there's some big name actors in other southern industries who want to wait until their movies are ready to go into the theaters. But I think more than any movie, as I said, more than any film industry, as I said in the beginning, Malayalam cinema is well poised to make these releases online. Theater going in Kerala is still not a very comfortable experience for women in single screen theaters. Women don't just go on their own. I think this opens up an avenue for a lot more people to engage first, as soon as possible in movies when they get released. And obviously for those of us in the diaspora, as well as, non-Malayali viewers like you, this is a great chance for us to get to be part of movies as soon as they release as well. I have no complaints.
And I don't either, because we have talked about the fact that I have in the past have had to wait for months for a DVD to be available before I can even see something that I was excited about 3 or 4 or 6 months prior. So I love theaters and I love going to the theater, and it's a different experience than streaming, but I have been so grateful at the chance to see these films like pretty much first day, first show when they just drop straight to streaming. So I think, we can look at the negatives, and certainly there are in terms of theatrical releases and theater owners who are really struggling everywhere in the world. But I think we can also see some positives, and it'll be interesting, moving forward to see how the cinema world copes with both of those ideas.
Yeah. The other thing I was thinking about was that Sufiyum Sujatayum is only one among these films that could have been served well by a theater release. Yep. Because the way it was shot was very much meant to be seen on a big screen. It's funny that it was, OTT, always planned as an OTT release and not a theatrical release.
I'm not sure, but I don't recall them ever making any. I don't recall that there was ever a question about that decision, other than in things like in Tamil cinema, Vijay's Master. Very clearly, they made the decision that they were going to wait for a theatrical release. If I were a film producer and my option was to sit on a film and not make my money back and to sell it to a streaming service, I would probably make the decision to sell it and make my money and allow me to produce more films. I think every creator needs to consider, filmmaking is a business. And as much as those of us who love it for what it is beyond a business, I think we have to recognize that for some producers, it might mean they don't produce another film, or it might be, take 5 years for them to come up with the money for that. And I don't begrudge any creator who makes the decision to send something straight to streaming.
Yeah, and the margins in Malayalam cinema are not huge. So they're just was sitting on a film doesn't make a lot of sense if we're turning out movies as fast as Malayalam cinema does. And in a lot of ways, Malayalam cinema is very, very, because it, it shoots so fast, you often get a lot more timestamps on the films. Like it's in this specific era. Like in Maniyarayile Ashokan, he makes a joke about Donald Trump. In a few months, that's going to be world news. So yeah, because of the topicalness of a lot of Malayalam films, I think it's just better to get it out there. Except for something like Sufiyum, Sujatayum, I think I could see how, because they were aspiring to something like Inda Moideen, which was definitely worth seeing on the big screen. They could, they could have somewhat benefited from taking it to the theaters.
Yeah, and certainly films that are very, the story is really their selling point, like Halal Love Story, like See You Soon, that translates no matter what. And I would agree with you that, sometimes the cinematography really, it's a shame we couldn't see it on a big screen. But, we're living in the strangest of times, and people are making the best of the situation and the best judgments they can for their work.
And this was a missed opportunity for the late streaming service Regal Monk that was set out to release Malayalam movies on the same day, online on the same day that they release in theaters. I think they only ever managed to do Jayaraj's Ottal through the streaming platform. But, if they had launched in 2019, they would have really had a great time this year.
I know. I was so excited when they came on the scene, and so discouraged that they couldn't make it work. And you're right, timing sometimes with this stuff is everything.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening to the Poland in Empathy podcast.
If you like what you're hearing, remember to come back for our next episode and share our podcast with your friends.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can email us at polandinempathy@gmail.com or reach out to us on our Twitter feed @polandinempathy. See you next time.